You don't belong here." The words sliced through the silence of the boardroom like a blade. 70 eyes turned, not toward the man who spoke them, but toward her. A single second stretched into a quiet eternity as Amara stood frozen, still gripping the report she had just handed out, her name printed cleanly across the cover. Proposal for Equity Reform. Amara D. Cole. She blinked once, twice. The senior partner, Mr. Lennox, did not blink at all. His voice hadn't raised. No shouting, no dramatic pause. Just those 4 words, heavy as iron shackles, dropped casually into the room like they meant nothing, or everything. Amara was the only black woman in the room, the youngest executive by 2 decades, and, by internal promotion, the first junior partner in Hartwell and Wexler's 85-year history to propose a policy overhaul without explicit invitation. But she knew this silence well, knew what it meant when powerful men said nothing while others disrespected you, knew the restraint required to survive this game. And for a moment, her hand trembled slightly at her side. Then she looked straight at Mr. Lennox and smiled. "I belong here exactly as much as the mess you're all trying to cover up." The room stirred. A few jaws shifted, a throat cleared, an assistant lowered her gaze. Amara sat down and opened her laptop, calm but electric. This was no ordinary meeting, and she wasn't here for approval. She was here for justice. Asterisk, asterisk. 3 years earlier, Amara had joined Hartwell and Wexler as a diversity hire. That was the phrase she overheard someone say in the elevator on her 3rd day. She'd graduated magna cum laude from Princeton, built a career cleaning up corporate disasters in pro bono clinics, and had been personally recommended by a state judge. But none of that mattered when she walked the halls as the black girl who smiled too much. She didn't smile now. She had spent 18 months analyzing internal data on promotions, contract negotiations, performance reviews, and litigation patterns. Quietly, methodically. What she found was a deeply entrenched pattern of discrimination, race-based delays in promotions, compensation gaps disguised by job title changes, and a ghost protocol used to reassign clients away from women and minority employees. No one talked about it. But it was all there, in files, in emails, in patterns. And then there was Marlene. Marlene was a janitor. 61 years old, black, worked there for 23 years. She was fired last winter without severance for allegedly stealing client data. Amara had found her crying in the parking garage, surrounded by 2 plastic bags of half-packed belongings. They had accused her of espionage because she took out a recycling bin that included shredded documents. That night, Amara went back upstairs and reviewed security footage from the janitorial clearance logs. Marlene had done nothing wrong, but no one had reviewed the footage. HR hadn't even asked for it. It was already decided. And that was when Amara decided, too. She wouldn't leave quietly like so many others. Wouldn't hope for change from the inside. She would force it. Not with anger or chaos, but with what the firm understood best: evidence, structure, pressure. She spent months building the report, gathering proof, compiling data, interviewing quiet allies, documenting patterns that crossed lines and cracked facades. She encrypted it all under a project codename, Echo Room, and when the quarterly review meeting was scheduled, normally just a space for harmless updates, Amara requested 5 minutes on the agenda to present a culture initiative proposal. She was granted 3. She used all 10. Asterisk, asterisk. Now, as she clicked through the opening slide of her presentation, she made eye contact with every person in the room. Not as a plea, but as a warning. "The purpose of this proposal is not to improve perception," she began. "It's to reveal operation." Slide after slide, she showed promotion gaps by race and gender. Omitted emails, undocumented meetings, anonymous testimonies that described hostile performance reviews, and HR intimidation tactics. Then she paused on a chart showing profit gains from client relationships, initiated by minority associates relationships, later reassigned to white executives. Lennox cleared his throat. This is bordering on defamatory. Amara looked at him. No, sir. It's bordering on discovery. A ripple of unease ran across the table. You have 30 seconds left, someone muttered. Amara nodded. She clicked to the final slide, a simple timeline overlay. It showed every lawsuit the firm had ever quietly settled involving workplace discrimination. 18 cases in 11 years. Every single one resolved with NDAs, confidential settlements, and one or more employee terminations. She turned to the group. What happens when the clients find out their ethical counsel buries civil rights complaints with confidentiality clauses? What happens when your pipeline of Ivy League hires includes black women who read this and walk away? No one spoke. She closed her laptop and slid printed copies of the report down the table. You don't have to agree, but you do have to respond. Then she stood up, smoothed her blazer, and walked out of the boardroom without waiting for a reply. It wasn't the end. It was the trigger. Asterisk, asterisk. The retaliation came fast. 2 days later, she was stripped from a high-profile client case she'd led for 6 months. Her security badge stopped working temporarily, an IT glitch, she was told. A silent email arrived from HR requesting a voluntary transition conversation. Her office was reassigned, pending renovations. But the real blow came when she learned she was being investigated for unethical data handling practices. They were going to try and fire her. She expected it. That same day, she leaked the report anonymously to a journalist friend who'd spent the last year covering corporate discrimination scandals. Within 48 hours, a headline exploded online. Leaked report exposes systemic bias at elite law firm internal sabotage, racial pay gaps, and silenced whistleblowers. Her name wasn't mentioned. Not yet, but it didn't need to be. Inside the firm, panic ignited. Leadership scrambled. PR drafted blanket statements. Board members called emergency meetings. Lennox's expression turned from smug to strained. But Amara wasn't done. She had one more card to play. One that didn't just expose the rot, but demanded reconstruction. The hearing was held on a rainy Thursday morning. It was internal, just HR, legal counsel, and Amara, but she knew what it was. A performance. They were building a paper trail, staging a due process facade before they terminated her. In rooms like these, guilt was implied by the invitation. But Amara came prepared. She wore a charcoal gray suit, no jewelry, natural curls pinned back. Clean, sharp, undeniable. They handed her a folder labeled Policy Breach, Data Misuse. She placed it on the table without opening it. I won't be answering questions without representation, she said calmly. A pause. You're not under investigation, Miss Cole, said the HR lead. A woman who had once asked Amara what it felt like to have urban roots and Ivy League polish. No? Amara raised a brow. Then this is a courtesy meeting? More silence. She reached into her bag and pulled out her own folder, labeled Echo Room, Addendum A, Retaliation Log. It included timestamped screenshots of every blocked access request, reassigned client, and system change since her presentation. She slid it across the table. This meeting is being recorded, the HR lead warned. Perfect, Amara replied. So will my next one with the EEOC. That cracked something. HR exchanged glances with the firm's legal counsel. They knew she had leverage. Not just accusations, but receipts. They hadn't expected her to fight this way. Not after the pressure, the isolation, the cold shoulders in the hallway, the closed doors in executive lounges. They were betting on her exhaustion. But she was raised by a single mother who once stood down a landlord in court with a toddler on one hip and a printout of tenant rights in the other. Amara was tired, but not weak. She stood up. This firm built its power on silence. Mine ends here. She walked out of that office, knowing the machine would keep grinding. But something had shifted. She had become a problem they couldn't contain. Asterisk, asterisk. Over the next week, she met with 3 attorneys. 2 declined to represent her, claiming conflict of interest. But the third, a young black lawyer named Elise Mercafo, didn't flinch when Amara laid everything out. "They'll offer you money to shut up," Elise said, flipping through the files. "But they don't want this going to court. Especially not now." The media had caught on. A former employee published a Medium post backing up the leaked report. Then another. A class action lawsuit began brewing. Clients started asking questions. And quietly, one of the senior associates, a white woman named Hannah, who'd never spoken to Amara before, reached out with her own stack of documentation. "They demoted me after my maternity leave," she wrote. "I stayed quiet. You didn't." The dominoes were tipping. Still, the board held firm. Lennox doubled down, issuing a press statement denying systemic patterns and framing the leaks as manipulated misrepresentations. They painted the narrative: a disgruntled junior, an internal outburst, an overreach. Amara knew their strategy: reframe, minimize, smear, but she wasn't playing defense anymore. She was about to go public. Asterisk, asterisk. 1 week later, Amara agreed to an exclusive interview with a national investigative podcast. Not for fame, not for a platform, but for truth. The interview aired in 3 parts. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply walked them through the data, the silence, the erasure, the way a black woman could be praised for her work until that work challenged power. She spoke of Marline, of the settlement logs, of the mentorship programs that led nowhere, of the champagne toasts in glass towers built on buried complaints. The episode went viral in less than 24 hours. By the end of the week, several corporate clients released statements suspending partnerships with Hartwell and Wexler, pending internal review. A third-party audit was launched, and a hearing was scheduled by the State Bar Association to investigate ethical misconduct. Still, Lennox didn't blink, not publicly. But in private, he offered a settlement. 7 figures. Amara said no. Instead, she submitted a counterproposal: full reinstatement, an independent equity board, public release of audit findings, mandatory restructuring of the HR grievance process, and the return of every employee terminated under a confidentiality clause in discrimination cases. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about the system she refused to let keep swallowing people whole. Asterisk, asterisk. 2 nights later, she received an email from the firm's compliance director. Subject: personal. "I stayed silent longer than I should have. I read your report. I cried when I did. Tomorrow, I resign. And I'm handing over something you'll need." Attached was a zip file titled Lockbox. Inside, over 200 internal memos, audio recordings of partner meetings, and suppressed complaints never reported to state authorities. It was the match, and the powder keg was already soaked. Amara sent it to Elise, her attorney, who froze when she heard the first recording Lennox laughing as he dismissed a sexual harassment complaint with the words, "She knew what she was signing up for." By morning, the file was in the hands of regulators. The next day, Lennox was placed on indefinite leave. That afternoon, Amara was reinstated, not just to her position, but promoted. Senior Equity Officer. Title clean, office restored. But she didn't celebrate. She walked into her new corner office, closed the door, and wept for 10 long minutes. Not out of joy. Out of grief for the years lost, the colleagues erased, the injustice tolerated so long that its exposure felt surreal. Then she stood up and got back to work. Because survival was never her endgame, transformation was. Asterisk, asterisk. 2 months later, a press conference was held. The firm announced the creation of a new internal justice unit, an independent ethics board, and a restitution fund for wrongfully terminated employees. And in front of every major outlet, the CEO stepped down. Amara was offered the position. She declined. "I'm not here to be your shield," she said. "I'm here to make sure no one else needs one." Instead, she took a board role and used her power to bring in new leadership, diverse, accountable, transparent. She reached out to Marlene personally and offered her a role in the new Office of Internal Accountability. Marlene laughed, then cried. "I thought they'd buried me," she whispered. "They tried," Amara replied, "but we grow back stronger." The story didn't end with applause or glory. It ended in policy drafts, in budget reallocations, in angry memos from executives who hated being held accountable, and in hallway conversations whispered between new hires who said things like, "She's the reason I applied here." She made this place different. She didn't let them win. The emails never stopped, not after the press conference, not after Lennox's departure, not after the restructuring began. They came from strangers, from interns, from women in other firms, from janitors, paralegals, project managers, from people Amara would never meet, who had heard her voice on the podcast, or read her name in the article, or passed her image on a digital news banner. Some messages were one line, "You gave me hope." Others spilled out like confessions. They made me feel invisible for 5 years. "You reminded me, I'm not crazy." Amara read everyone. She didn't respond to most. She couldn't. But she created a folder called Voices and filed them all. When days felt heavy, she opened that folder like a window and remembered who she was fighting for. Because the war wasn't over. Lennox may have been exiled, but he wasn't gone. He moved quietly behind the scenes, giving interviews to conservative outlets, painting himself as a victim of woke sabotage and corporate hysteria. He filed a wrongful termination claim, then dropped it once the Barr inquiry intensified. But others like him remained inside the firm. Quiet, polished men in tailored suits who smiled through clenched teeth and called her Madam in meetings. She recognized their games. The way they complimented her ideas only to stall them in review. The way they tested her resolve with patronizing questions and polite sabotage. She documented everything. This time, she wasn't fighting for survival. She was building a blueprint. Asterisk, asterisk, one morning, she entered a strategy meeting and found someone had accidentally removed her access to the agenda folder. Again, she didn't react. She took out a printed copy she brought as backup and laid it on the table. Another partner, an older man who'd stayed quiet through the reforms, leaned back in his chair and said, "You're very prepared these days." She smiled. "Always have been. You just didn't notice." The air chilled. Another partner, a woman named Dana, who had previously distanced herself from Amara, broke the silence. "She's right," Dana said softly. "We didn't want to notice." It was the first time anyone in that room had said it aloud, and it cracked the armor. A few weeks later, Dana came to Amara's office after hours, holding a folder. "It's about recruitment," she said. "We're still hiring the same profile, same schools, same zip codes. I know it's not enough to call it out. I want to help fix it." Amara opened the folder and saw the numbers. She nodded. "Let's build something better." They started a working group. Not for diversity optics, for structural overhaul. They changed the criteria for recruitment, broadened outreach to HBCUs and community colleges, introduced blind screening for applicants, reevaluated how potential was measured and who was defining it. And slowly, change took shape. Asterisk, asterisk, but justice wasn't just policy. It was personal. One evening, Amara received a message through her firm email. It was short. No name. You destroyed my career. Hope you're proud. She stared at the screen for a long time. Not because it shocked her, but because it reminded her how deeply threatened power feels when it's exposed. She didn't reply. Instead, she forwarded it to the new compliance team. A few days later, the sender was identified. An anonymous tip revealed it had come from a former manager who had retired early after her report surfaced. She declined to press charges, not because she was afraid, because she was focused forward. Asterisk, asterisk, 3 months into her new role, Amara stood in front of the entire firm associates, partners, interns, custodial staff. HRN announced a radical initiative, a Truth and Reconciliation Archive. It would be optional, confidential, but open to any current or former employee who wished to document their experience within the firm, positive or negative. No retaliation, no edits, no NDA restrictions. I'm not asking for shame, she said into the microphone, her voice steady. I'm asking for reflection, for truth, for legacy. Because the way we work should not come at the cost of people's dignity. There was silence, then applause. Then, the next day, the stories began arriving. A Latina associate who was told to change her accent. A trans paralegal who was misgendered daily by senior staff. A Muslim intern mocked during Ramadan. A disabled assistant who was moved to the basement because it suited their needs better. The archive grew. It was raw, painful, unfiltered, but it was real. And with every entry, the firm's myth cracked open to let in something rare. Honesty. Asterisk, asterisk. Then came the award. An industry panel announced Amara would receive the Leadership in Equity honor at a national legal conference. She didn't want it. But Elise, her attorney-turned-friend, said gently, "You don't need the validation, but others need to see it happen." So she went. The night of the ceremony, she wore a navy silk dress and no makeup. Just clear lip balm and silver hoops, like her mother used to wear. She stood on the stage and looked out at a sea of tailored suits and polite applause. She didn't thank the firm. She didn't thank the system. She thanked every person who wrote to her anonymously, every employee who leaked a file, every janitor who kept working while being ignored, every person who stayed long enough to crack the walls from inside. And then she said, "Some people say I burned it all down. I didn't. I held up a mirror, and the building caught fire from its own reflection." Gasps and silence. Then rising applause. After the ceremony, a young black law student approached her, eyes wide. "I thought I had to choose between my peace and my ambition," she said, "but you made me think I can choose both." Amara took her hand. "You can, but you'll have to fight for it. Just make sure the fight doesn't turn you into what you're fighting." The student nodded, and Amara saw in her the same fire she once felt, sitting in a classroom where no one said her name right, reading legal opinions that never included people like her. Now she was writing her own. A year passed. The firm looked different on paper. New hires, new policies, a revamped code of ethics. Diversity reports published quarterly. Quiet exits of those who resisted change. More transparency, more eyes watching. But underneath, the struggle remained. Because power doesn't vanish, it mutates. Amara learned this the hard way. During a late-night strategy review, she discovered a proposal had been quietly altered after her signature. A paragraph on client accountability deleted. Language around reparative practices softened to corporate jargon. No track changes, no audit trail. She confronted the managing editor. He blamed version confusion. She didn't argue. Instead, she requested a full version history audit from IT. What she found was worse. 3 documents bearing her credentials had been subtly revised over the past 2 months, and all the changes shared one theme dilution of impact, of intention. A voice. She brought it to the board. One member asked, "Do you think maybe you're reading into this too much?" She stared at him, the only person in the room who had once dismissed her as that diversity experiment who got lucky. Then she opened her binder, turned to page 6, and slid it forward. "I'm not reading into anything," she said. "I'm reading everything." There it was, metadata logs, timestamps, names. Silence again. Only this time, it ended with consequences. The editor was suspended. New protocol was established. All edits to policy documents required dual verification and audit logging. Amara personally oversaw the installation of the new system. She wasn't just building safety nets. She was building memory. Because institutions don't change when people forget. They change when forgetting becomes impossible. Asterisk, asterisk. On the anniversary of the report, what some began calling the Echo Reckoning, the firm held an open forum. No agenda. No press. Just chairs, microphones, and space. Amara didn't plan to speak. She planned to listen. The room filled slowly. Some staff stood against the walls. A few spoke in cautious tones about the ways they still felt unseen. A paralegal broke down in tears, describing the time she was called sweetheart by a senior partner in front of a client. And then Marlene stood up, wearing her firm-issued badge again. Holding a copy of the first internal newsletter she helped design for the new equity office. "I cleaned floors in this building for 2 decades, she said, voice steady. "Most of you never looked me in the eye. Now I help review policy drafts. It doesn't erase what happened, but it proves something." A pause. That power doesn't always live where you think it does. A hush fell. Then Amara stood, heart pounding not out of fear, but gravity. "I don't want a legacy," she said. "I want a blueprint. If I disappear tomorrow, I want this place to stay changed. That's why everything we do must be documented, reviewed, and challenged. No one reforms a building by repainting the lobby. You start at the foundation." The room held its breath. Then came applause, not loud, not performative. Steady. Real. Asterisk, asterisk, later that week, she was approached by a man from another firm. Mid-40s, white, blunt. "We've been watching," he said. "You've shaken things up. Impressive. But be careful. Revolutions burn out." Amara looked him in the eye. So do regimes. He laughed uncomfortably, extended a card, and left. She never called him. Asterisk, asterisk, but the revolution wasn't hers to own anymore. A group of junior associates launched a podcast breaking down legal ethics in accessible language. A trans intern drafted a framework for inclusive pronouns in client-facing materials. One of the cafeteria workers proposed a sliding scale lunch program to support employees who sent money back home. Amara funded it herself. Because every act of equity that sustains becomes another thread in a system designed to strangle progress. She no longer fought to be seen. She fought to make others visible. Asterisk, asterisk, then one day, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping, whistleblower restructures, law giant from within, and a note. "I used to work in places like yours. I never said a word. You did. I'm 68 now, and you reminded me I'm not too old to speak up. Thank you. No name, just ink. And dignity." Amara placed it in the Voices folder, right at the top. That evening, she sat in her office alone, looking out at the city skyline. From here, the buildings looked calm, orderly, fair, but she knew better. She knew how many rooms held closed doors, closed minds, and closed fists hiding behind polished handshakes. Still, the fight had changed her. She no longer needed to be welcomed. She had entered anyway, and she wasn't leaving. 6 months later, Amara walked into a room she once feared. The state legal board had invited her to give a keynote at their annual ethics summit, a room that had, for decades, protected power under the guise of procedure. It was the same institution that once ignored every anonymous complaint from junior lawyers. Paralegals, assistants, the same that silently buried patterns of abuse under the clean stamp of resolve internally. Now they asked her to speak. She thought about saying no, but then she remembered all the nights she stared at her ceiling wondering if the silence would ever break. And she said yes. Asterisk, asterisk. The room was cold, deliberately neutral, full of authority. She stepped up to the podium. No screens, no slides, just her voice. My name is Amara D. Cole. I'm not here because I was the most brilliant lawyer in the room. I'm here because I refuse to stay silent in a system that punishes those who speak. Eyes narrowed, pens hovered. I uncovered patterns of discrimination at my firm. But that's not special. What's special is that I lived to tell it. Most don't. They're pushed out, bought off, or broken. Her voice didn't rise. It anchored. This industry tells people like me that justice is blind, but I've seen it flinch when power enters the room. I've seen it blink when it's asked to confront itself. And I've seen it turn away when the ones who are hurt don't come from the right schools, or speak with the right polish, or look like the ones who wrote the rules. No one interrupted. She continued. If justice is a mirror, then it's cracked. And until we admit that, every reform will be cosmetic. Every policy will be a performance. Silence. Then one man stood up. He was old, balding, respected. His voice was dry. What do you want us to do, Miss Cole? You say we've failed, but what's your solution? Amara looked at him, her eyes soft but unflinching. I don't want you to fix it. I want you to feel it. Sit with it. Let it rot your comfort until you can't look away. Then go back to your institutions and change the questions you're asking. A beat. Stop asking, was it illegal? And start asking, was it just? He didn't sit. He didn't speak. But he lowered his head. Asterisk, asterisk. Later that day, a committee member pulled her aside and said, I thought you'd come in angry. Amara smiled without humor. I am. I've just learned how to aim it. Asterisk, asterisk. She returned to the firm to find her office door propped open with a sticky note that read, Come to the conference room. Now. She walked in to find the entire equity team, HR, and 2 interns from the summer program sitting in silence, eyes fixed on the screen. On it was a viral tweet from a legal news outlet. Breaking. Amara Cole's keynote address stuns the state board. Demands shift from legality to morality in corporate law. The comments were lit. Some praised her. Some attacked her. Some said she was ruining tradition. Others said she was saving lives. She turned to the room. Let's get back to work. No one clapped. They didn't need to. They followed. Asterisk, asterisk, that fall, a new hiring protocol was passed. All interview panels required at least 1 junior associate, 1 staff member from operations or support, and 1 former client rep. No exceptions. It was radical, and it worked. Retention went up. Internal complaints went down. But more importantly, so did fear. People began speaking up before the damage was done. They didn't come to Amara as a last resort. They came to her first. And that changed everything. Asterisk, asterisk. One morning, she found herself sitting across from a woman who reminded her of her younger self. Dark skin, wide eyes, braids pulled back in a tight bun, nervous fingers wrapped around a notebook. I just joined last month, the young woman said. And I saw what you did. I read everything. And I just want to know, how did you survive it? Amara looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, I didn't. The young woman blinked. I mean, I survived them. but not who I was before. That girl who wanted to be perfect, invisible, exceptional enough to be spared. She didn't make it. A pause. But the one sitting here now? She's not afraid anymore. The young woman nodded, eyes wet. I want to be like that. Amara smiled, gently. Then stop waiting for their permission. Asterisk, asterisk. At the end of that year, the firm's board voted unanimously to make the equity division a permanent arm with independent decision-making power. Its mission wasn't PR. It was protection. For everyone. And for the first time in the firm's history, the annual report included a section titled, Systemic Failures We're Still Addressing. Amara insisted it be printed on the first page, not the last. Because real accountability isn't what you bury, it's what you lead with. Asterisk, asterisk. She stayed 2 more years, not because she had to, but because the foundation needed time to dry before she moved on. When she left, she didn't go quietly. She published a letter in the firm's internal journal. You'll be tempted to return to comfort, to convenience, to the performance of equity instead of the reality of it. When that temptation comes, remember the people who were silenced. Remember the janitor in the hallway, the assistant you overlooked, the partner who whispered thank you. And remember that power is not in the title. It's in the choice to use your voice when it trembles. I'm leaving, but the echo stays. Asterisk, asterisk. She founded her own organization months later. Not a law firm, a justice lab, dedicated to investigating institutional harm, reforming corporate accountability models, and providing pro bono defense for whistleblowers. Its name? The Echo Room. And this time, it didn't hide behind passwords. It amplified. Asterisk, asterisk. She visits the old firm once a year now, quietly, without fanfare. Just to sit in the lobby for a moment, not to gloat, to remember what it took, what it cost, and what it gave birth to. She passes the new interns. Sometimes most don't know her story. Just that her portrait hangs near the ethics office, with a quote etched below it. Truth doesn't break systems. It exposes the cracks already there. They look up at the face in the frame, and then they return to work, a little taller, a little braver, and maybe just maybe less afraid to speak.